Greetings, welcome, happy Sunday. We hope you are reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health. And if you're not there, you're rapidly approaching that point. We welcome you to this week's edition of the Our Ancestors Voices program, a program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Welcome to our topic this week, which is 9/11. The tall tale that keeps growing. Of course, today is September 10th. Tomorrow it's September 11th, the 22-year commemoration of September 11th, 2001. And what we're going to talk about today in relationship to this topic is how the institutionalization of 9/11, September 11th, 2001, has developed in this backward cesspool country to a level where nobody today really, you have to go far and wide to even hear any type of analysis about what happened on September 11th, 2001. And so that's what we're going to break down below what you get from CNN and Fox and NBC and CIA networks. We're going to talk to you about the little known facts about what led to, in our view, 9/11 happening. So we're happy that you decided to join us today for that. And we want to thank the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, give honor and respect to them for their struggle to regain these lands back. You know, we don't want to hear any talk about 9/11 or anything like that when the most horrific tragedy in this entire Western Hemisphere is the violent theft of lands from all of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we don't give a damn whether you want to hear that or not. We don't want to hear about your stuff. So we're talking about justice. That's the key. Is like, it's not just you got an opinion and we got an opinion. There's truth and there's objective truth and justice. And that is that these lands are stolen from the indigenous people and they're fighting for their lands back. And we definitely support their right and their struggle to do that. And we also give honor and respect to our African ancestors. I'm reading a book right now that talks about the sabotage of the Central Intelligence Agency. The book is entitled White Malice. You should definitely check it out, by Susan Williams, White Malice by Susan Williams. The book chronicles primarily the CIA sabotage in Ghana and in the Congo. And just thinking about our ancestors there, people like, of course, Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba and the other militants in the Convention People's Party in Ghana and the National Congolese movement in the Congo, and how they were just not only just betrayed, sold out, but just completely sabotaged. And I would argue in the case of both men, killed by imperialism. Even in Nkrumah, I believe that's what happened to him. I don't believe that he just died out of thin air. So we honor our ancestors like Nkrumah and Lumumba and all of the many millions of African people that fight for our liberation. And we're thankful that you decided to join us today so that we could talk about this fallacious tragedy that's been rammed down our throats for going on 25 years. And put it in some historical context based on critical analysis. That's what we're going to do today with 9/11. We're not going to talk from a position of sentimentality. We're revolutionaries. We don't do sentimentality. We're here to talk about truth and justice. And so if that's a struggle for you, this is the wrong program for you. So that's what we're going to get into today. And we'll just do our normal introductions to get us started. Just some information. If you want to donate to the All African People's Revolutionary Party, those are the vehicles to do that. And you most certainly should donate. The donations you make go to our work specifically on the ground in Africa to build our struggle for Pan-Africanism. But our Ancestors' Voices, as I mentioned already, is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Each Sunday, same time, same place. And if you don't catch us live, of course, you can watch us on YouTube, the AAPRP. And the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party that is based in Africa. We are not based in the Western Hemisphere. We're not based in North America. We're based in Africa. Although we have organizers on the ground all throughout the Western Hemisphere. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. We believe the total liberation and unification of Africa under one scientific socialist government is the solution to the problems everybody of African descent faces all over the planet Earth. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And Our Ancestors' Voices is a program that's hosted each week by myself and Shakura, my biological and ideological daughter, and both of us are active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So we are grateful again for you joining us for today's topic, 9/11, the tall tale that keeps growing. And to get us started, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Greetings, greetings. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, sir. Thank you. So we, of course, have to start you all with just being reminded, because for some of us, we continue to be brainwashed and we continue to accept the fact that this is just our reality and we're not really interested in thinking critically. We're not in organizations that are working for justice. And so we're not really comfortable challenging the status quo. It's important to note that the very first thing that I want to start off by saying is that everything you know about the United States is based on a lie. That is so, so important. And if you can't listen to any more of this seminar, just understand that, and understand that that lie has been molded over time, and understand that that lie has had other lies on it. I'm not going to paraphrase this exactly the way Kwame Ture said it, but he basically said the way to understand US history or herstory or their story is basically to understand that European and imperialists lied and lied and they lied some more and they lied on top of lies to make up for the lies that they told you. And at some point they've lied to you so much that you think it's the truth. Meanwhile, when you critique that and raise the truth to say, hey, this is actually really what happened, then they lie some more and say, no, you can't really trust that site. That site, that's not really a credible site. And so I think that that's really important, just to understand that everything we know, and who has taught it to us? The people who taught it to us also lied to us. So I think it's so important. This is why we push the importance of learning and increasing your political education. The biggest part of you having a higher political education is, so that you can help develop a organization of some type that is working for justice, or maybe you can contribute to one that's already developed, of course. But I would argue even bigger than that, it's about you being able to literally create a barrier where you cannot accept BS. You cannot accept lies, because you have a foundation of political education where you may not know every single thing that's happened in the world, but you have a working concept of understanding that if some of these things have happened, then it's quite possible that other things have happened. You start to develop logic. You start to develop the ability to draw conclusions. You start to develop being critical about things. You understand that if parts of Asia was colonized and parts of Africa was colonized, then it's quite possible that parts of America were colonized. It's also quite possible that parts of Ireland were colonized. And you start to develop these conclusions that will lead you to these common denominators, where you can start to see, okay, so if all of these folks were suffering from the hands of colonization, then that would explain why none of these folks have respect or power today, because every single one of these groups I just listed don't have access to their land. And you start to develop these deductions based on that. That is why political education is so important. And I want to clarify, of course, we're not just talking about the Western approach to political education, because if we believe that, then we're just talking about quote unquote voting registration. No, we're not talking about whether or not you think Joe would be a better candidate than all the other Republican candidates who have thrown their hands in the race for 24's election. No, we're talking about understanding what really happened and resisting the lies that have been taught to you. So for example, if you believe that Christopher Columbus discovered America then that's definitely a lie that we're talking about. How is it possible for someone to discover something that was already established, that already had communal behavior shifts, that already had relationships that were communal, that had functioning societies of people that were bartering and trading and communicating and sharing resources? They were educating one another. They were expanding their cooking choices and what they were doing. How is it possible that someone can, quote unquote, discover something when you literally have people living and functioning in a society already? I don't understand that. I need you to help me with that. That would literally be like you walking into a daycare center and saying, I think this should be a daycare center, even though it's already been functioning for 3 years, where children are coming and they're learning and they're being safe and they're being watched over. I don't understand how that's possible. So that would be one of the major lies that we've been taught. I would argue there's been other lies too, such as the fact that Abe Lincoln freed the slaves. That's definitely a lie. And the only reason I have access to this kind of information where I can decipher the truth versus a lie is because I am in an organization that's working for justice. And more than that, I am in work study, which is a component of that organization where we are strongly encouraged to find the truth and to find the truth from credible, reliable sources, not from sources that are already feeding into the same lies we're trying not to accept, because that would be defeating the purpose, right? So we're not going to pull in quotes from CNN and quotes from MSNBC and quotes from all these other news stations that are atrocious in terms of feeding us lies every day. No, we're pulling from sources that we can actually trust, like Grandma, the site that has all of the articles that break everything down for what Cuba is doing, everything from health to education to resources to training doctors to go to other parts of the world. That's one of my favorite resources. We also have a sibling organization tab on our website where you can go to different sibling organizations and learn about what they're doing from their websites, from their mouths, right? So these are just some examples of how we need to resist some of the lies. But first, in order for you to resist something that's not based on truth, that means you need to recognize that it is not truthful, okay? And so I would really encourage us to just really think about how, we have this idea that I guess something is wrong with us and Europeans are here to save the day, but in actuality, everything that they have, they've taken it from someone else, including the land that some of us are on right now. If we are considered to be on any land from the very top of Canada to the very bottom of Chile, then we are on indigenous soil. And so again, it can't be discovered if it's already been established, right? And so we have to understand that everything the Europeans have is based on their ability to take, their ability to exploit, their ability to rape, their ability to murder, their ability to colonize and to coin things and to use their language to manipulate and misogynize and to do all these things that we have come to understand in our society. I would also argue that the whole reason that America was stolen from the indigenous people and then Africans were brought here so that we could build it up on our backs, may I add, was so that it could benefit the European people. That's basically the bottom line. That's why they call it the transatlantic, because there were trading and bartering that was happening between the 3 points of Europe and Africa and the Americas. And in doing that, people were exploited, people were killed, people were raped, people were dehumanized, people were colonized. There were so many things that took place because really what we had was I would say a very strong reintroduction of classism when we had the indigenous people's land stolen. And so I'm going to continue to weave that into the next slide, if you will, and just thinking more about how classism has really become a detriment to people, especially when we think about the lies that we've been taught, because it hinders on the fact that that's where we lost humanity. And really, I'm sure there were other parts of history and her history and their history where humanity was lost. But definitely, I would say where we're exploiting other people and taking other people's lands and resources. That's definitely a point where we probably didn't even understand what it meant to treat one another as humans anymore. And so because of that, we're starting to think well, because I have this person working for me and because their skin is so dark, I can tell them from other people, I definitely think that they are less than me. And so now we're starting to develop how we would add value to someone else, which is literally what classism is all about, where you decide whether or not you're going to respect somebody based on how they appear, or how much money they have, or how much money you think they have based on what material possessions they have with their person, or maybe what kind of car they're driving, or how they talk, or how they look. Are they put together? Is their hair done? Like all of these different things that make it okay, basically, for you to mistreat them if you think they are less than you, pretty much, right? And so the dangers of classism, because if we're thinking more about these lies, right? So first, we have all these Africans who are being kidnapped and stolen from Africa, right? And Africa itself is under attack because now all of the ways that were African and that were common and were known are now being disintegrated and replaced with nonsense that has been completely endorsed by European behaviors, European culture, European values, everything European. Foods have been replaced, language has been replaced, clothing choices have been replaced, music, ideologies, religion, spirituality, all of these different things that each of us has come to use in some aspect of our lives, especially if we are African, has now been replaced, and we have been forced to adopt these new ways of life, hence the definition of colonization. Then we move on to understand that not only were Africans kidnapped and exploited and were enforced and were enslaved all around the world, but we also have this concept where Africa is still under attack because of colonization, right? And so now we have millions of Africans by leadership of King Leopold in the Congo, for example, that were murdered. 10 million Africans were killed just in the Congo alone because of this idea where King Leopold and other rulers, I guess, from Europe felt like there was still more to be gained. They still had more resources to take. They still had more opportunities that were behold of them. And so the only way to, I guess, access that was to get everybody out of the way who was trying to fight against that. And so not only was it worse to take people from the continent, but now you're taking everything that you have access to and putting your name on it, giving your power to it, and allowing people to understand that it either came from you or you found a way to get it and you can find a way to get more. Not thinking about the fact that you were stealing theft of land, you were stealing theft of resources of that land, and more importantly, you were stealing the people that descended from that land. And so then if we continue to move on, and again, we're still highlighting how classism is still linked in with all of this, because you're not going to steal people and make them enslaved in your property, because that's what Africans were, was considered property. You have plantation owners who literally took out insurance policies on Africans because that was their property. And just like you would insure your vehicle, or you would insure your domicile, or you would insure your child and make sure they have medical insurance, you want to make sure that you didn't want anybody to steal your property. And so unfortunately, that was the ideology behind it, which gave birth to insurance companies. They made their money off of the transatlantic slave trade. But you're not going to know that, because that's a lie, right? You're not going to know that unless you really dig deep and understand what's happening. And so I think it's really important to think about how this classism piece is still parallel with what we're talking about, because we have different example after example where the truth has been revealed. The Europeans have been completely dehumanizing when it comes to dealing with Africans and indigenous people and other colonized people. And we're seeing some examples specifically on this particular slide. And for those that are joining virtually in some other way and not on Zoom, I think this image on the slide is beautiful and communicates very clearly what we have going on in here. And so I'll describe for you, you have two people who look to be as if they are quote unquote racing, right? And so you have the finish line at the end of the picture. And then at the beginning, you see the two people, and you see one person on the left, another person on the right. The person on the left is clearly of European descent and even identifies maybe as being a male. And then you have a person on the right who may be of a marginalized group and has some type of melanin in their skin. So maybe African or maybe indigenous, something of that nature. And so the person on the right who is marginalized and of color also has a ball and chain connected to their foot. Okay, so remember, they're both racing, or they're about to race. They're waiting for the gun to go off and the shot put to go, and so they can start running. So this ball and chain obviously is going to slow this person down, but that's not it. In addition to the ball and chain, they have barbed wire on their track. They have an alligator in a pit who's hungry and licking his lips. They have a brick wall that they have to jump over, and they have what looks like crab reed grass or something that might cause an allergic reaction at some point. My point being, the European person on the left has none of those things except for two hurdles, literally just two normal hurdles that a racer would jump over when they were jumping. And so I think that's really important, because at the bottom it says, quote, "What's the matter? It's the same distance," end quote. And I think that is beautifully said. And so again, like classism, this piece about classism, where there's this divide based on your value and your importance, right? And then if I just continue on and wrap up this slide, we also have to think about how it wasn't enough for Europeans to steal Africans and enslave them. It wasn't enough for Europeans to continue killing Africans on the continent after they stole other Africans and enslaved them. They had to continue by establishing these international systems of racist subjugation. So of course we know about the breakdown and the timeline of how racial segregation took place in the US, but also the apartheid in Azania. Right. And I think that it's important to think about how that immediately enforced the class divide, because now we're assigning value on someone based on the color of their skin, but we were always assigning value based on how we felt their value measured up, how much money we thought they were able to contribute, how much money they had access to, how much money they could have access to, determined how we would treat them, which is very dangerous, you all, because if we continue to allow classism to run our lives, we are going to completely forget what humanitarianism looks like. More importantly, we're going to forget what it means to be humane. Because at the end of the day, how much money someone has should not determine how you treat them, but yet we experience that every single day. And for those of us that don't have access to endless money, it can be really difficult for us when you're treating us badly and criminalizing us in public. So you're assuming that we're going to steal when we walk in your store. You're assuming, if we are marginalized, that we have several children by different men, because it would never occur to you to not make those assumptions for a European marginalized person, but you make them all the time for people of color. Because why would we be not having multiple children? That's all we do, is know how to give birth, right? Like, these are the kind of dangerous things that people are finding themselves experiencing, you all. But yet this is happening every single day, and the racial subjugation didn't help with that. So then we're also thinking about how white supremacy, and again, like, these are all systems. I want to be very clear. These are all systems of oppression. So I'm not talking about a specific European person who is a part of the Ku Klux Klan when I talk about white supremacy. When we talk about white supremacy, we're talking about a system that adds value to people who descend from Europe while taking away value from folks that are not there and making them, quote unquote, less than. Okay. And so I would say that's the same for patriarchy, right? Adding value to male identifying people, and therefore allowing their word to be more dominant, their word to be more valued, their word to be more significant than non-male people, and therefore giving males more power and more respect and more abilities to make more decisions, whereas they can influence the lives of other people, but the other people can't influence their lives. And so in closing, I'll wrap up this last bullet here and just say that the last thing Europeans did, if those three things weren't enough, stealing Africans and enslaving them, killing Africans on the continent, and then introducing racist subjugation, was they always act today as if the problem is ours, even though they have done all of these things that have delicately lined up a domino to make life really, really difficult for us. I continue to think about how, we still have all of these situations where people are struggling to pay their rent. People are struggling to keep their houses. People are struggling to raise their children. And the number one comment that usually comes out is, well, you should have planned better, or you should have known better. You should have had more money in the bank. And that always really blows my mind, because there's, again, this image on the photo really plays the part where you're not thinking about how classism, how privilege, how white supremacy, how patriarchy, how male privilege, how all of these different things have allowed a person to be in the position they are in. Not to mention their ancestral background, not to mention their power, if they have access to their land, if their people had access to their land, how all of these things play into them being in the position they are in today. See, that's the problem when you don't acknowledge privilege. It's very dangerous because that means you're not acknowledging that you did nothing to get there. All you did was breathe air and exist. And somehow you have been able to rise up on that throne just because of who you are, just because of who your family is, just because of the investment your great grandfather made a long time ago on my great grandfather, right? And so I just, it's so crazy to me. It is so crazy. And so we just have to think about that a little bit more, because that's why we tell you all every weekend, there's nothing wrong with you, because this last bullet is true. When it says that Europeans act like everything that's happened or has happened, they don't acknowledge the impact, but instead that we are the problem. That is true when they make us feel like there's something wrong with us. And capitalism doesn't help with that. They've got all these materials and possessions and items that exist because you should be buying all these things so that you can be a better person. When in actuality, the thing that's going to make you a better person is reclaiming your humanitarianism, reclaiming your humanity, and then using that humanity by joining an organization that's working for justice because you care about humanity. That's the best way that you can do that. That's the best tool that you can buy for yourself. That is the best way that you can spend your ideological money, is by reclaiming your humanity. Because you can resist capitalism, you can resist patriarchy, colonization, all of these systems of oppression, Islamophobia, homophobia, all these systems, and you can find a way to help other people have a better way of life. And then hopefully they can find a way to help you have a better way of life. Because if you work together, then there's higher numbers where you all have an opportunity to organize, to develop your plan, and to figure out how you're going to do it. And it helps when you all are all in organizations working for justice. But even if you're all in one organization working for justice, you can still work with other organizations as we work together to make this happen. And so I just want to say that in closing, this is really important to remember the lies and how the lies have protected classism, because that's one of the biggest systems of oppression that cannot be terminated according to capitalism and imperialism. That's one of the most important, because we have to continue to always be able to separate people by a class divide. And so the best way to do that is to feed us lie after lie after lie after lie, so that we're not starting to think and ponder, why is it that I'm being treated like this because I don't have health insurance? Or why is it that I'm being treated like this because I have public health insurance versus private? Like, these are all the things that we need to be unpacking, you all. It's not too late. It is not too late to join an organization that is working for justice, and it is not too late to do something for humanity. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you very much. And I think that's a great segue into this topic of 9/11, the tall tale that keeps growing. And we'll just continue on. I want to start this section, because what Shakur talked about, the point is this entire capitalist empire system, all of the capitalist countries led by the United Snakes of America, it's all based on lies, right? So we want to frame September 11th, 2001 in that context, right? And the first thing we want to say is that before 1990, you had the Soviet Union and you had the Eastern Bloc, which were the socialist countries in Eastern Europe, so-called socialist countries in Eastern Europe. That's certainly debatable. But those countries were at the forefront at that time of representing the so-called socialist world. And then you had the capitalist countries that were led, of course, by the United States of America. The capitalist countries had the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which obviously still exists today and serves the purpose of terrorizing the entire planet. And these Eastern Bloc countries, as they were called in Europe, had the Warsaw Pact. And so you had this concept called the Cold War, where supposedly the capitalist world is fighting the socialist world. That was the concept of the Cold War. And so what Mao Zedong did, the great Chinese revolutionary, in the Bandung Conference in 1955, is he coined the phrase the third world. And what he meant by that is the first world is the capitalist world. That's the quote unquote technologically developed world. The second world is the socialist world, which is vying for increasing exposure in the world and ability to advance socialism. And then the third world, in Mao Zedong's view, were people from Africa, from Asia, from Central and South America. So that's just a concept, so you understand that if you didn't already. The Soviet Union, of course, was the leader of this so-called second world, the so-called Warsaw Pact, the Eastern Bloc of Europe. And the Soviet Union fell in 1990. It came apart, it disintegrated. And that's a whole different seminar workshop that we might do one day. We would love to do that one, but we don't have time to go deep into that right now. But the results of the Soviet Union crumbling is the capitalist world, even while the Soviet Union was still in power in Eastern Europe, had its eyes on building this massive pipeline, oil pipeline that they called the Casperian oil pipeline. And this oil was located, if you look at the map on your screen, and just, Shakur, if people are on Zoom, if they're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they can see everything you can see. So if you look on your screen, you see the map of Eastern Europe there. And the reason why they called it the Casperian pipeline is because you have the Casperian Sea there, which is the waterway there. And where that's located, where you see the arrow there, that's Afghanistan, right? And above Afghanistan, you have Turkmenistan, right to the left above Afghanistan, and then directly to the right, above right of Turkmenistan, you have Uzbekistan. And these are former Soviet bloc countries that had unbelievable oil reserves that these capitalists wanted to tap into to exploit. And the way they wanted to do that was to build this Casperian pipeline. But of course, while the Soviet Union was there, this was not possible. The Soviet Union would have never permitted that to happen. But they still had their eyes on this, and they wanted to do it because their oil analyst reports coming from this region of Eastern Europe said that the oil was so pure in those reserves that it required very little refining. And if you know anything about, the theft and production of these resources, the less development you need to put into producing the resource, the much more profitable it is. So this is very attractive to these people. And so they had their eyes on how could we get this Casperian pipeline built. Now, as you see from the map, the most efficient route to get to Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan was through the southern route, which came through northern Afghanistan. That was the most logical way that the Casperian oil pipeline could be built. And we're talking about the 1970s, getting into the 1980s, when these people are trying to plot, because that's what they do, and figure out how can we get this oil pipeline built? How can we get to that money? Meanwhile, in the 1990s, Afghanistan was governed by the Taliban, who many of you, you watch these capitalist news entities. The Taliban, they're right-wing Islamists, jihadists. That's how they talk about them. Again, we could do a whole workshop on the Taliban, but just for the purposes of this session here, the Taliban was a ruling Shiite Muslim organization in Afghanistan. And if you know anything about Islam in that region of the world, the people who subscribe to Shiite beliefs that's considered a more radical approach to Islam. So that's who these folks are. That's what we'll say about it. Not assigning any value to it, just giving that out as information. And so the Taliban was in control of Afghanistan, and they were engaged in this war against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had backed a regime change in Afghanistan in the 70s, and the Jimmy Carter administration here in the United States had a strategy of imposing a Vietnam type war against the Soviet Union. So they started organizing and training and assisting these Shiite Muslims who they call mujahideen, which are, warriors in Islam, right? When we say that, we're talking about people you've heard of, like, of course, the Taliban, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Party of God, these types of folks, Osama bin Laden, that's who made up all of these Shiite elements in the world. And the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, was training these people, arming them so that they could overthrow the Soviet-backed government in Afghanistan in the 70s. And if you know history, of course, they were able to do that. And once they did that, the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan. That's important to know because they want you today to believe that the Taliban is a vicious enemy of the U.S. And the U.S. supported, armed, trained the Taliban in that war against the Soviet-backed regime. They trained them. They were their allies, just like Saddam Hussein in Iraq. They trained Saddam Hussein. They armed him and his version of the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. They did that. They provided weapons to Iraq in its 8-year war against Iran in the 1980s, from 1980 to 1988. The U.S. backed Iraq in that war because Iran was governed by the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was a part of this radical Shiite Muslim world that I'm talking to you about. And so the U.S. was not, they weren't enemies to Iraq and Saddam Hussein. They weren't enemies to the Taliban. They just used these people as long as these people served their political interests. And then publicly, since the Taliban was labeled a terrorist jihadist organization by the U.S. propaganda, but privately, the U.S. wanted to negotiate with the Taliban on how they could come into Afghanistan and gain access to Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan so they could access these massive oil reserves, you all, in Eastern Europe. That's what they wanted to do. That's the bottom line of what they wanted to do. Now let's talk about the bait and switch here. This is the lie that they tell you to set up what they want to do. And I'm negligent. I forgot to mention, please, although I'm mentioning it late, please acknowledge the URL at the top of the screen there, www.patreon.com/Burkina Books. This is a project, we've talked about this before, being organized by our AAPRP organizers in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso and the Sahel region of Africa is hot right now. And please support our organizers on the ground in Burkina Faso. We will show the QR code at the end of this broadcast, but there you have the URL. Donate what you can. They're buying books. Political education is a necessity. But in terms of 9/11, the bait and switch is that in 1997, what you're looking at in the picture on the screen, it's a picture of the Taliban leaders who were in Texas in 1997. They were there to discuss the possibilities of working through Afghanistan to build this Casperian pipeline. This meeting was held between Taliban leaders and leaders in the oil industry in the U.S. And one of the central people that negotiated the development of this meeting was the Bush family. George Herbert Walker Bush, terrorist number 1, George Walker Bush, terrorist number 2. They're the ones who facilitated this, but there were all these oil interests that you see on the screen that were there. They have this discussion with the Taliban, the ones they told you were terrorists, to talk about how they could gain access through Afghanistan to have access into Eastern Europe to build this oil pipeline. Now, we don't know what happened at that meeting, but what we do know is that for whatever reason, they were not able to come to agreement in a negotiated sense of how these U.S. and European oil companies would come into Afghanistan through territory governed by the Taliban and gain access to Eastern Europe now that there was no longer a Soviet Union to prevent that from happening. We don't know what happened. But what we do know is that this coalition of capitalist oil companies, Chevron, Shell, Exxon, and many other smaller oil companies that came together because they all saw the importance of being able to build this Casperian pipeline. So they put aside, they want to tell you, because people don't have any clue how capitalism works. Well, it's a free market economy. What a dumbass thing to say. I'm sorry. If you say that, it's a dumbass thing to say, because that is not at all how capitalism works. Capitalism is about building monopolies. And by monopoly, they're not competing against each other. They're competing against you and me. So Shell, Chevron, Exxon, they don't have any problem uniting on a project like the Casperian pipeline, because it's all about them building the ability to control the oil in the world to the consumers that need to buy it for heat and to fuel your vehicles. That's us. So they're really not in competition again. In fact, they form cartel. That's what a cartel, you think, I say cartel and you think, Pablo Escobar in Colombia. You don't even think, well, what does the word cartel mean? Cartel means entities that come together to form a price, right? So that's why Toyota has the Toyota Corolla, right? Honda has the Honda Civic. Nissan has the Nissan Sentra. They're all basically the same damn car. And they negotiate with each other about how much they're going to charge for those cars. Because if they have a variance in price and the Corolla is the same car as the Civic and it's a lot less, guess what? You're going to buy the Corolla, not the Civic. So they negotiate. So make sure we make these comparable so that we all can make money. But that's what y'all got to understand about capitalism. So these oil companies united to build this Casperian oil pipeline. And their agenda was to weaken the Taliban. Apparently, what we do know is that meeting you see in the picture was not successful enough for them to have the access through Afghanistan that they wanted. So they wanted to open up that access to Eastern European companies to build the lucrative pipeline, this Casperian pipeline, which would magnify oil profits for those three major megala oil companies, but also many other oil companies throughout the world. So our argument in regards to that, and there you see in the picture, is the Casperian oil pipeline. It's built today, you all. It was built in the 80s. It was started in the 80s, and it's complete today, and it's in operation. But this is where they're building the pipeline through the Caspian Sea. You see the water there, and it goes from Afghanistan up into Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, as these terrorists wanted it to do. So our argument today, you all, is that 9/11, September 11th, 2001, was simply a product to provide cover for these capitalists, this capitalist agenda to create hegemony in the oil industry by building this pipeline. Yes, that's exactly what we're saying, is that 9/11 was covered for them to do that. Because if you think about what happened after 9/11, is everything they needed, the so-called Patriot Act, the so-called war on terror. This allowed them full access to Afghanistan, this so-called war on terror. And that is the only way that they were able to weaken the Taliban, because that's what happened in the so-called war on terror in the 2000s. That's what happened, is they weakened the Taliban. And in fact, they drove the Taliban out of power for a while, for a long period, until just recently, a year or two ago, the Taliban was out of power. And this gave them the access to Afghanistan to build up this Casperian oil pipeline. So what we're saying is 9/11 was used as justification to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. And by doing so, it solved two problems for imperialism at once. One of the problems is that they saw Saddam Hussein as unstable. Yes, they did arm him. Yes, they accused him of using sarin gas on the Kurdish people in Iraq. And I'm sure that that did happen. But what they didn't tell you, and what most of you didn't bother to check out on your own, because you're not involved in political education, you know, you're involved in Megan the Stallion and Kanye West and you know, whatever type of foolishness that they throw at us. So you didn't know anything about what happened in once they had armed Saddam Hussein. But the truth of the matter is that Saddam Hussein at that time was a president, co-president of the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party. And the other co-president at that time was Hafez Assad, who was the president at that time of Syria. And the Ba'ath Party had a split, but basically the Ba'ath Party, which was founded in 1947, was an Arab, a pan-Arab party, like the All-African People's Revolutionary Party is a pan-African party. The Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party was a pan-Arab party. We support the Ba'ath Socialist Party, but Saddam Hussein, because of whatever his specific political ambitions were, in my humble opinion, engaged in politics that in many ways compromised the vision of the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party. But at the same time, he engaged in some policies that supported that vision. So the US felt like they could no longer trust Saddam Hussein, that he had served their purpose when he was used to overthrow the Ayatollah Khomeini and the regime in Iran. And so they wanted to get rid of him, especially after he went to correct what happened during the Ottoman Empire. I mean, there's so much history, and I know most people have no clue about it, and we only have an hour. But in 1990, Saddam Hussein sent troops into Kuwait. And they told you, well, he did that because he's a dictator that's trying to, well, they didn't tell you, and you didn't know, and you didn't bother to do it because Megan the Stallion is not, Nicki Minaj is not talking about it, and Cardi B's not talking about it, so you didn't bother to talk about it. But what happened is that Kuwait, Bahrain, those Arab countries were stolen from Iraq during the Ottoman Empire period. And so what Saddam Hussein was doing is saying, we want to get our lands back. Whether you agree with that or not, it's objectively the history. And so the US not wanting this to happen, because as I mentioned, they saw Saddam Hussein as highly unreliable, and Bahrain and Kuwait are Arab Uncle Tom countries that the US has in their back pocket. So they couldn't allow Iraq to take control of Bahrain and Kuwait. So removing Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party was certainly a strategic political objective of the United Snakes of America. And of course, invading Afghanistan to gain access to Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan to build the Casperian pipeline, oil pipeline, was a primary objective of these oil companies. And you have to, again, understand how capitalism works. The Rockefeller family controls the majority of stock in Chevron Oil. They also control the majority of stock in all of the NBC affiliates, NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, all of that nonsense. They control that. So if you looked at NBC, any one of those stations, and you're like, oh, I'm trying to get information about what was happening during the US-Iraq war, you obviously, you know, you just, I mean, I don't even know what to say. It's like Malcolm said, you've been bamboozled. Okay. I mean, that's it. Like, you're being played like a fiddle. And most everybody in this backward country is being played like a fiddle. So that way they can accomplish those things. They could achieve two political objectives. And that was their objective. That was the purpose of 9/11. So what I'm saying to you is that we don't believe that 19 hijackers from Saudi Arabia, whatever the hell they claim, I don't even remember. It's not important because it's not true. But we don't believe that 19 people hijacked. And there's all kind of documentation to illustrate that. Like I guess some of you believe that the planes hit those buildings, the World Trade Center, and they disintegrated. That's what they told you. but their passports somehow managed to survive the incineration and fall to the ground, because 87 floors, by the way, to the ground, because these passports they allegedly, that they told you that they found, are the ways that they identified these so-called 19 people that hijacked these planes. And we can, again, that's a whole workshop in and of itself. We don't have time to get into that here, but the point we're making right now is that we don't believe that 9/11 happened any way close to what these people said. We believe that the whole thing was staged, whether you want to say that it was staged through AWACS, like the way the automatic pilot control system that they utilize, whatever the case may be. I don't, that's a whole topic. There's a lot of information out here about that. It's been 22 years. But what the point we're making right now for this session is that the whole thing was used as cover for these two political objectives that we're talking to you about right here: the weakening of the Taliban, and to create access to the oil companies I just mentioned, to build that Casperian pipeline throughout Eastern Europe. And also, when that happened and the Taliban was driven out of power in the 2000s, then this eliminated all the obstacles to all the poppy fields. And Afghanistan has many poppy fields. And this eliminated all of the obstacles to that. And so this is the reason why your Federal Bureau of Investigation, I say yours because I don't claim any, all of these organizations are terrorist organizations. We in the APRP, we don't claim any of them. Well, you live in America. Well, yeah, that's because we're here to organize and take back the resources that have been stolen from us for 500 years. Because we understand that once we regain control of our African resources that powers the wealth in this backward cesspool society, that we will be able to grow and have capacity to win in this struggle for liberation. And that will be the pathway to creating one unified socialist Africa. And when we have one unified socialist Africa, you cannot have a United States that's the most powerful and the richest country in the world, because the only reason why it's those things is because of the exploitation of Africa. So we know that when that happens, all you proud Americans, African Americans, you're going to be trying to out-African us to be connected to Africa, because you will no longer be able to gain access to all of the stolen merchandise that you sell your soul for here in this backward cesspool. So what we're saying is that this invasion of Afghanistan and the weakening of the Taliban opened up these poppy fields. So these drug dealers began to use that open pipeline to bring heroin all over the world. And from 2005 through just about a year or two ago, your own FBI, that's why I brought them up, they reported every year that 50-something% of the heroin in the United States was coming from Afghanistan. So that's, that gives you an idea, like they don't give a damn about you. They don't give a damn about you. You can vote for whoever the hell you want to vote for. That is not the way you can empower a system to protect your interests. Clearly, that's not the way. It's how's it worked for you so far? It has not worked at all. You can't make a plausible argument that that process has worked to bring any peace and justice to any oppressed people on the planet Earth. You can't argue that unless you're a fool. And some of us are fools, so we would try to argue that. But if you're in your right mind, there's no way you can argue that. So today, as I mentioned, that pipeline is built, you all. It exists. And it's pumping record oil profits for those oil companies, Chevron, Shell, Exxon, and all the other oil companies affiliated with it. British Petroleum. The oil companies are happy. They have record profits. Afghanistan and Iraq, of course, suffer the devastations of 20 years of warfare in their territories. The women in Iraq, the women in Afghanistan, according to the United Nations, the studies that they conducted in those countries are showing rocket fuel in their breast milk that they feed their babies. This is the reality of 20 years of unjustified war, weapons of mass destruction. That's what they told you. But the real reason is what we're talking to you about right now. And so these conditions exist in those countries, and the majority of people in this country are more confused than ever about what happened. Don't have a clue what happened on September 11th, 2001. Don't have a clue what's going on with this system today and what they're doing around the world. Don't have a clue what's happening in Ukraine, listening to everything that they tell you about, not understand, don't know anything about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, don't know anything about NATO, don't know anything about its objectives, the terrorism it has wrecked on the planet Earth, don't know anything about the power and control that exists within Ukraine's government by neo-Nazi elements, the Azov elements, don't know a damn thing about any of that. Don't know that your Barack Obama put those goddamn neo-Nazis in office in 2014. You don't know a goddamn thing about any of that, and you want to call us crazy. You're the one that's crazy. Wake the hell up. Damn, wake up. Your ancestors are imploring you to turn Megan Thee Stallion the hell off and turn on some goddamn books and political education and understand what the hell is happening in this world. Please. Our future generations depend upon it. Please join us next week. We'll be here on September 17th. Same time, same station. It's related. The topic next week is your PhD from social media. We're not going to be attacking anybody for using social media. What we are going to be doing is talking about how the times have changed now, where intellectualism is a negative thing. And just being able to spout off something because you have an internet account and a computer is all you need to be a subject matter expert on pretty much everything on the planet Earth. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So join us and go to our AAPRP Forward Ever shop and buy some of our revolutionary clothing, support revolutionary African organizations. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, you all. Go to AAPRP-intl.org and do that. Go to abetterworld.me. All of these videos are there, housed there in one place, and you can get them and look at them. You can also go to our AAPRP CA for California account and look at them there. Support Hood Communist, a very wonderful site, revolutionary Pan-African analysis. And again, I mentioned the QR code is on the screen. Put your smartphone up there and scan it right now, because we want you to donate to the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity in Burkina Faso. Support our AAPRP organizers on the ground in Burkina Faso. The Sahel region is on fire in Africa, and we need to support the revolutionary Pan-African work that is designed to give our people the liberation that we rightfully deserve. And we want to ask you to do that. So please scan the QR code and make sure that you're doing that. Support all of the programs on the ground that we have here. All of these programs, please support them. We are not giving you capitalist news. We're not asking you to give us anything. We're just asking you to help us finance our work on the ground, nothing else. And my book is still available. You can buy it. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Strongly encourage you to do so. Unfortunately, the only way you can buy it is by ordering it on Amazon. And please don't waste my time with that. No, I don't do Amazon. You just went to Chevron. I mean, people say this to me. You just put gas in your car from Chevron. You just went to some capitalist supermarket and bought groceries, but you don't do Amazon. You know, do you have a printing press that you can give me so I can produce books? These goddamn capitalists, all you have to do is type the name of the book in and they send it all over the world. I don't have to do anything. So if you have a better plan for how I can do that, I would love to hear it. I would love to hear it. but we're trying to get a word out. We'll use the enemy's resources to educate our people against them. And that's what this book is designed to do. So please help us do that. These fascists are out of control. We just had another one in Jacksonville, organized a plan, went in and shot and killed Africans. And most of you listening to this, if somebody came where you are right now and wanted to kill you, you don't have a clue what you would do. And people say to me, well, what could you do if someone comes? Well, that's because you're looking at it at an individual level. That's the problem that we have. And what we're trying to talk to you about is we have to organize collective community. If we are organized on a collective level, we would see those goddamn bastards when they came in our community. We would be looking out for them. Like the committees in defense of the revolution in Cuba. They see drug dealers before they make their first sale. They see sex traffickers before they make their first exploitative kidnapping. They see all that. So that's what we want to build in our communities. But if all you see it is from an individual perspective, well, then you'll never understand it. So get the book so you can help you understand that. So thank you all for being here. Please come back. Please tell people. Have a great rest of your Sunday evening, okay? Forward ever, backwards never. Do not be discouraged. We are winning. Forward ever. Have a great rest of your evening.